Hey big art muscle friends. In this video, we're gonna draw a seascape that turns into a landscape all made out of lines. I call it a linescape. I love bad puns. Materials are linked in the description below, so grab what you need and let's get started. A few notes before we begin. First, we'll be going over how to watercolor the background. I'm going to show you two different techniques, the wet on wet watercolor technique and the wet on dry watercolor technique. Keep watching to find out more. Any perfectionists out there? Yeah, this note's for you. Before you add lines in permanent marker, make a plan, practice it, and consider starting with very light pencil lines that you can trace over. As a perfectionist myself, taking the extra time to practice and make a plan has been really helpful for my artistic journey. To all of my non-perfectionist friends out there, you do you, boo. Enjoy the process of making a mark and just seeing where it takes you. Shout out Peter H. Reynolds. Last thing, I have Zentangle pattern idea sheets and practice templates linked in the description below. As always, download, print, practice, and let's build some art muscles. We're starting this project by painting a piece of paper. I'm using two because I want to show you two techniques. On the left, I'm going to be using what's called the wet on wet watercolor technique. That means I'm going to be adding a layer of water before I add my paint. And on the right side, I'm going to leave my paper dry. Call that wet on dry. I'm going to start the same way from the bottom up using my darkest colors. I'm going for the rainbow here. You do not have to do the rainbow. You can make your background any colors you want, but I'm going for sort of a seascape that transitions into a landscape kind of deal. So that's why I'm using my darkest color first and going from the bottom up. Notice how the paint behaves a little differently. On the left side, where I've wet the page first, the paint bleeds a lot more, and it's not a dangerous kind of bleed. Bleed in art means to spread out. This helps me create a really gentle transition between colors. And while smooth transitions are awesome, on the wet on wet side, you don't have as much control. But notice here on the right side, my edge isn't going anywhere. It's far more crisp and smooth. So if you want more control, use less water. So the wet on dry technique might be the best for you. But if you want to experiment, let the color and water behave as it will, use the wet on wet. There's no wrong answer. It's just what you're in the mood for at that time. I'm going to speed up this video so you can see how I finish both of these pieces. I'll be using the same colors for each, so just notice how they behave differently on the wet on wet versus the wet on dry. Pro tip. Change your water after you're finished with the cool colors. If you start painting with your warm colors and dip that brush into the cool colored water, it's going to create a murky brown that'll leak into your paint and just create some less than ideal colors that you may or may not have been planning for. I slowed down the video here so you can notice two things. One, I start my warm colors at the top and work my way down. Two, my wet paper has gone a little dry at the top, so I'm going to add just a bit more water before I add colors. Watercoloring a background like this is great for exploration and experimentation. If one of your goals is to start recreating skies from life or photographs, references you see, you must first learn how watercolors are going to behave on different styles of paper. How much water is going to contribute to how much bleed? How much pigment will you need to get a certain color? How is your color mixing ratio going to come into play? There's a lot of different factors. It's like learning the alphabet and putting your words together before you read a big book. Small steps are important in art too. And friends, I didn't even mention the way you hold your brush. I use a sort of tappy scoot technique. You might want to swoosh it across like a broom on a floor. There are so many little different factors that contribute to how your final piece will come out. And what will help your skills grow is consistent practice over time. Before I show you how I add my lines to my background, I wanted to show you that I did indeed practice my patterns before I began. This took me about 40 minutes. It's sped up here, of course. The first half of this is all geometric patterns. The second half, I focus on more organic patterns. Do you have to fill in the entire sheet? Of course not. Do what's comfortable, but I like detail, I like patterns, so I made one half one way and the other half the other way. I wanted to fill all the rectangles. By the end of this process, I felt very confident in my ability to create patterns on my final product. I'm not going to be using pencils on my background, so I wanted to make sure that I was ready. Practicing is how you get ready. If you like these specific patterns and you want to see them up close and practice them yourself, here is a link that has this exact worksheet as well as a practice template for you to download and print. Enjoy. I edited the video this way so you could see how similar my process is. Whether my lines are organic or geometric, I turn my paper sideways. It's easier for me to do it this way. Now on the left, you're going to notice that my lines start far more organically. I did that on purpose to replicate the movement of the ocean. And as I add to the green part, which are my mountains, my lines become far more sharp, more geometric. On the right, I wanted to go for a more strictly geometric look. So I'm breaking up each piece with straight lines and adding a lot more sections because I have a plan here to add a lot more straight lines. Adding more sections like this will take more time, but that's okay. It's not a race. Every artist works at their own pace. You know I like rhyming in my art room, but don't be afraid to move your page around and just keep adding. I will say be careful with that big Sharpie though. Mind your hands, it can get a little smudgy. Here's where my pattern practice is gonna really come in handy. It's time to add the lines and shapes. Get creative with how thick and thin your lines are. Think about the positive and negative space where you'll let your background show through and where you might add some more black to cover it. The best advice I can give is to start simple and build slow. Now let's take a look at each piece by itself so you can see how I build out the patterns line by line. Thanks for watching and making this watercolor landscape with me. I hope you had fun creating the different oceany versus land line textures. That was my favorite part. You can do so many things with lines, patterns, and Zentangles. Endless possibilities. If you like this style of art making, get ready, because in the next lesson, we'll be making a Zentangle inside a yin-yang symbol. Sometimes working inside of a shape or on a template can be a little less stressful than working on a huge background all at once. But make no mistake, circles are no easy shape to work with. And if you can't print out the templates I'm going to give you, you're going to have to get creative and find something circular to trace to make your very own yin-yang symbol. So the challenge will be there for you, and I hope you stick around for it. Until then, happy creating.